A silent city stands frozen in time, its empty streets a question that has haunted historians for generations. We are about to explore 30 of these forgotten medieval cities, places where entire populations simply vanished, leaving behind stunning ruins and a profound mystery. By the end, you will possess a deeper understanding of the fragile forces that can cause a thriving civilization to collapse. We will uncover why a metropolis on the Silk Road was abandoned forever, and what secret led a mountain fortress to be left completely empty. What do you believe is the greatest threat to a society's survival? The Lost Citadel of Ani stands as a ghost on the Turkish border, its skyline of ruined churches silhouetted against the empty plains. Known as the City of 1001 Churches, this was once a powerhouse of the medieval world, a crossroads of cultures, and a beacon of wealth along the Silk Road. At its zenith, its population swelled to over 100,000 souls, and its grandeur was said to challenge even Constantinople. Then it fell silent. A Mongol invasion shattered its defenses, and a catastrophic earthquake in the 14th century shattered its stones. On the surface, this seems like a simple story of disaster. Yet the true puzzle of Ani is not why it was damaged, but why it was never rebuilt. Generations passed, but no one returned to claim its magnificent Armenian cathedrals and fortified palaces. How could a city of such profound strategic and architectural importance be so completely and utterly forsaken? The answer lies not in a single cataclysm, but in a slow, silent death. The old Silk Road trade routes that were its lifeblood began to shift, bypassing the region and draining its economic heart. Political tides turned, leaving Ani a forgotten borderland caught between empires. Its abandonment is a stark lesson in how a place can become a victim of its own changing world, a theme of economic collapse that resonates powerfully with our next mysterious city, a place where prosperity vanished almost overnight. While Ani's wealth faded with the shifting sands of trade, another great city met its end not through economic change, but by the slow, hungry sea. The story of Dunwich is a hauntingly different kind of loss. Just off the coast of Suffolk, beneath the cold, grey waves of the North Sea, lie the sunken streets of what was once one of England's most important ports. In the 13th century, Dunwich was a thriving hub, a bustling centre of trade with a royal charter, grand monasteries, and a harbour crowded with ships. It was a place of immense prosperity and power. Then, piece by piece, the land itself began to crumble. Great storms battered the soft clay and sandstone cliffs, and the relentless North Sea clawed away at the foundations of the city. Entire neighborhoods would vanish in a single night, swallowed by the waves as the coastline retreated. The sheer speed of this collapse is what baffles historians. Why did the defensive measures, the seawalls they attempted to build, fail so completely against the onslaught? And perhaps more mysteriously, why did the population, over generations, seemingly accept this gradual annihilation? They did not fight for every last inch of stone. Instead, they watched their churches, their homes, and their history slide into the abyss, eventually abandoning the ruins to the water. Today, the city is almost entirely gone, a medieval Atlantis lying in silent ruins on the seabed. Local folklore adds an eerie whisper to the historical record, with tales of sailors sometimes hearing the ghostly toll of church bells from deep below the surface, a spectral reminder of the community lost to the deep. Dunwich stands as a powerful testament to a different kind of societal collapse, one driven not by war or economics, but by an unstoppable environmental force. This theme of a population simply walking away from their home, seemingly without a desperate final struggle, leads us to a city that vanished for a reason that is even more difficult to grasp. High on a mist-shrouded ridge in the Andes, a city of stone clings to the mountains, so perfectly hidden it feels less like a ruin and more like a secret. Machu Picchu, the great mountain citadel of the Inca, represents a mystery of a completely different nature. While Dunwich was devoured by the sea and Ani faded with its trade routes, Machu Picchu was abandoned while it was, by all appearances, at the height of its power and perfection. Constructed in the 15th century with breathtaking precision, its granite stones cut and fitted together so perfectly that not even a knife blade can slide between them, this was a masterpiece of medieval-era engineering. Yet it was inhabited for less than 100 years. Its entire population vanished, leaving behind empty temples, silent plazas, and immaculate buildings. The greatest enigma is that the Spanish conquistadors who systematically dismantled the Inca Empire never even knew it existed. There is no record of a battle here, no evidence of a siege or a forced evacuation. The people simply left. So what could possibly compel an entire society to walk away from such an incredible achievement? A city that represented an unimaginable investment of labor and artistry. Historians have proposed many theories. Perhaps it was a sacred religious sanctuary for Inca royalty, a retreat that lost its purpose as the empire crumbled. Maybe it was a ceremonial center and its role was simply over. Some even suggest disease played a part, but the absence of any struggle or even any Spanish looters points to a quiet, deliberate departure. This was not a city conquered, but a city relinquished. Its story challenges our very idea of why civilizations end, suggesting that sometimes a people might make a conscious, collective choice to leave their greatest creation behind, to let the mountain reclaim it. This profound mystery of voluntary abandonment leads us to another ghostly settlement, where the choice to leave may have been driven by a force even more enigmatic than imperial collapse. Far to the north, on the windswept Orkney Islands, a different kind of ghost settlement tells a story of loss that spans millennia. Skara Brae is a Neolithic village, a community of stone-built homes so ancient it predates the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Yet its ultimate fate, a quiet and orderly disappearance around 2,500 years before the Common Era, echoes the mysteries of later medieval cities. What makes Skara Brae so profoundly puzzling is not the violence of its end, but the peacefulness of it. When archaeologists uncovered the site from beneath the sand dunes that had protected it for centuries, they found a village frozen in a single moment. Stone beds and dressers stood exactly where their owners had left them. Personal ornaments, tools, and even the remains of food were found scattered on the floors, as if the inhabitants had just stepped out for a moment. This was not a panicked flight from an invading force or a sudden disaster. Everything points to a planned collective departure, but if they planned to leave, why did they take so little with them? These were not disposable items, but cherished personal possessions, the very fabric of their daily lives. The prevailing theory is that a slow, relentless climate shift is to blame. The weather may have grown colder and stormier, turning their farmland barren and making survival on the coast impossible. Yet this explanation only deepens the mystery. This was a community that had weathered countless seasons, a people who had mastered their harsh environment for generations. What specific, overwhelming pressure finally broke their will to stay? Was it a series of catastrophic harvests, a social collapse that made their way of life untenable? The orderly nature of their exit suggests a communal decision, a sober agreement that the world they knew was gone and could not be reclaimed. Skara Brae stands as a powerful, ancient precursor to the patterns we see in later abandonments. a reminder that the choice to walk away from a home is one of humanity's oldest and most difficult stories. This theme of communities vanishing into the wilds of Northern Europe leads us to an even more unsettling case, a city that did not just empty out, but seemingly erased itself from the map. From the orderly silence of Skara, Brae, we travel to a place that vanished so completely it became a legend. The fortress of Timuturacan was once a powerful reality, a crucial Black Sea outpost for the medieval Kievan Rus. It was a bustling hub where merchants, soldiers, and princes from the Slavic north mingled with traders from Byzantium and the steppes, a cosmopolitan center on the very edge of the known world. And then it was simply gone, not just abandoned but utterly erased from the landscape and from memory. For centuries, Timuturacan existed only in old chronicles and folktales, a name whispered to mean a place so lost it might never have been real at all. Its exact location became one of history's great geographical puzzles, debated by scholars who scoured maps for any trace. How could a major trade and military center, a city of stone and commerce, disappear without a trace? The reasons for its downfall are as murky as its location once was. Some point to the slow, relentless siltation of its harbor, a quiet economic stranglehold that would have choked its lifeblood of trade over generations. Others suggest waves of nomadic incursions from the steppes, or the slow-motion political fragmentation that crumbled the Kievan Rus Federation from within. Yet the true mystery of Timuturacan is not just why it fell, but how it was forgotten. Its story highlights a profound fragility of urban life on the medieval frontier. A city could be built, thrive for generations, and then be so completely reclaimed by the land and erased from history that its very existence was questioned, until a single stone slab with an inscription was finally discovered in the 18th century, proving the legend was once real. This pattern of a mighty center dissolving back into the earth is not unique to the Russian frontier. It finds a startling parallel thousands of miles to the east, where another magnificent city was swallowed not by silt and obscurity, but by the relentless jungle itself. The silence of Timuturacan, erased by silt and memory, finds a perfect echo in the sands of Central Asia. In the heart of the Taklamakan Desert, one of the most unforgiving places on earth, lies the ghost of Loulan. This was no simple outpost, but a vibrant oasis kingdom, a crucial watering hole on the ancient Silk Road where East truly met West. For centuries, it was a bustling hub where Chinese, Tibetan, and Tocharian cultures mingled, a testament to human ingenuity in a landscape of extreme aridity. Then, around the 6th century, it died. The city was completely abandoned, left to the mercy of the shifting dunes. The obvious culprit is the desert itself, the slow creep of sand. Yet this explanation is deeply unsatisfying. Loulan was not a city of newcomers. Its people were masters of a dry world, having survived and thrived in that harsh environment for generations. They knew how to conserve water, how to build, how to live. So what could have happened that was so catastrophic it broke their ancient knowledge? The city's ruins offer haunting clues. Archaeologists have found its streets and buildings remarkably preserved by the dry air, and with them, the remains of its people. Well-preserved mummies rest in the sands, their features and clothing frozen in time. Even more telling are the fragile wooden slips and documents discovered there, written in a multitude of languages detailing trade, law, and daily life. This evidence points not to a slow decline, but to a sudden, sharp crisis. The life of an oasis city hangs by a single thread, its river. Historians now believe that the life-giving Tarim River, the sole source of Loulan's water, abruptly changed its course. This could have been triggered by a massive earthquake or a climatic shift that dried up its tributaries. Without warning, the city's only reason for existence simply vanished. The canals would have run dry, the crops would have withered in the fields, and the desert, held at bay for so long, would have begun its final, relentless march. Perhaps a series of apocalyptic sandstorms finished the job, sealing the city's fate under a suffocating blanket of dust. The people of Loulan, for all their adaptability, had no defense against their world's arteries being cut. They were forced to gather what they could and walk away from their cosmopolitan home, leaving letters unread and meals uneaten, a civilization interrupted. This pattern of a single, fragile resource leading to total collapse makes you wonder about other cities that depended on a similar thread, a thread that could be severed not by nature but by the hand of man. The silent stones of Loulan, buried by desert sands, speak of a world undone by a single, broken lifeline. But what happens when a city's greatest strength becomes its ultimate prison? High in the Crimean mountains, the fortress of Mangup Kale presents a puzzle of a different kind. This was not a city lost to environmental catastrophe, but one deliberately left behind despite being virtually unconquerable. For centuries, it served as the capital of the Principality of Theodoro, a final bastion of Byzantine culture. Its position was a masterstroke of defensive planning, a vast limestone plateau with sheer cliffs on all sides, accessible only by a few narrow, easily guarded paths. It was a natural castle, a fortress that repelled armies for generations. Its final capture by the Ottoman Empire in 1475 was a monumental feat of military force. Yet the true mystery begins after the battle was lost. The Ottomans secured their victory, and then they walked away. So did everyone else. Why would any conquering power or any displaced people fail to reoccupy one of the most defensible positions in all of Europe? The immediate answer seems to be one of simple logistics. Life on that high plateau was incredibly difficult. Water was scarce, reliant on cisterns that collected rainwater, and every supply, every piece of firewood had to be hauled up the steep, winding paths. In an age of cannons, its cliffside defenses were becoming less relevant against evolving siege technology. But this explanation feels incomplete. History is filled with strategically inconvenient sites that were inhabited for centuries out of sheer necessity. The total abandonment of a capital city, a place of immense symbolic and military value, suggests a more profound shift. The conquest of Mangup Kale was not just a change of rulers, it was a demographic and cultural watershed. The Ottoman victory led to the widespread displacement of the city's Greek and Gothic Christian population. New settlers had little connection to this difficult, mountaintop relic. The center of power, trade, and life shifted decisively to the coastal towns, leaving the old fortress as a monument to a vanished world. Its empty streets are a stark lesson that a fortress, no matter how strong, is nothing without a people to defend it and a reason to endure the hardship. This raises a haunting question for any seemingly permanent society. What is the true foundation of a city, if not its walls? This theme of a community's identity being its ultimate vulnerability finds a powerful echo in a city that was not conquered by an empire, but seemingly by silence itself. The stone walls of Great Zimbabwe rise from the African savanna like a crown of granite, a complex of towers and enclosures built without a single drop of mortar. This was the royal heart of a medieval empire, the capital of the Shona people whose influence stretched from the Indian Ocean deep into the interior, a kingdom built on the wealth of gold and ivory. At its peak, this city was home to as many as 18,000 people, a bustling center of trade and power whose stonework was so sophisticated it confounded early European explorers who refused to believe Africans could have built it. Yet by the middle of the 15th century, this magnificent center was emptying out. the royal elite, the very architects of this grandeur, simply walked away from their stone palaces. The traditional explanation points to a slow decline, a story of overgrazing and exhausted gold mines leading to famine and political fragmentation. The land, it is said, could no longer support the kingdom's immense appetite. But this narrative has always felt too simple, too passive for a civilization of such profound skill and resilience. Why would a society capable of building for the ages be so easily undone by environmental pressures they must have understood intimately? The timeline of the abandonment does not neatly align with a sudden, catastrophic resource collapse. Instead, historians now see a more complex story unfolding. The very source of its wealth, the gold trade, may have been its undoing. As new trade routes opened along the Swahili coast, the economic center of gravity shifted, bypassing the inland capital and draining its political power. The ruling class, their authority and income fading, may have lost their divine mandate to rule in the eyes of the people. They did not just leave a city, they left a throne. The question of where they went is just as compelling. Did they fragment into smaller chiefdoms, or did they migrate to establish new, smaller centers of power, their royal lineage dispersing into the landscape? The silent, majestic ruins of Great Zimbabwe stand as a monument not to a single failure, but to the intricate and fragile web that connects economic fortune to political legitimacy. A kingdom can be built from stone and gold, but it is held together by something far less tangible. This theme of a civilization's pillars crumbling from within leads us to a city that failed for the opposite reason, a place where the outside world arrived with overwhelming and catastrophic force. The grandeur of Great Zimbabwe faded from within, its authority quietly dispersing, but some cities were not allowed to fade. They were extinguished in a single, terrifying flash of violence. On the vast, wind-swept plains beside the Volga River, the capital of the Golden Horde once stood as a monument to nomadic power made permanent. Saray Burke was a city of staggering scale and opulence, a place where the Khans of the Mongol Empire ruled over a vast territory stretching from Eastern Europe to Central Asia. Travelers of the era wrote in awe of its bustling markets, its mosques with glittering minarets, and its palaces filled with treasures from across the known world. It was the administrative heart of a superpower, a cosmopolitan hub where cultures and goods flowed freely along the trans-Eurasian trade routes. Then, in the late 14th century, the conqueror Timur, known to history as Tamerlane, arrived with his army. His campaign against the Golden Horde was one of pure annihilation. The city of Saray Burke was not merely captured, it was systematically and utterly destroyed. The buildings were razed, the population was slaughtered or scattered, and the wealth of generations was looted or burned. This level of calculated destruction is one thing, but the deeper mystery lies in what happened next. Or rather, what did not happen. Saray Burke was never rebuilt. How could a city in such a strategically vital location, at the crossroads of major trade routes and on the banks of the Great Volga River, simply vanish from the map forever? The sheer scale of Timur's violence is only part of the answer. He did not just destroy stone and mortar, he shattered the very pillars that held the city up. The political unity of the Golden Horde fractured irreparably after this defeat, descending into a chaos of rival claimants and civil wars. Without a strong, centralized authority to fund and organize a reconstruction, the will to rebuild was broken. At the same time, the old trade routes that were the city's lifeblood began to wither, disrupted by the same political instability. The caravans found new paths, the merchants went elsewhere, and the economic reason for Saray Burke's existence simply evaporated. Its story is a brutal lesson in interdependency, A city can be the heart of an empire, but when that empire dies, the heart stops beating. The empty fields along the Volga stand as a silent testament to how completely a place can be erased, not just by an army's fury, but by the collapse of the entire world that gave it purpose. This pattern of a city's fate being tied to a single, fragile network leads us to a place that suffered the opposite fate, a city that died not from a sudden blow, but from a slow, silent strangulation. While the Golden Horde's capital was erased in a blaze of conquest, the English village of Wharram, Percy, died by 1,000 quiet cuts. Nestled in the rolling hills of Yorkshire, this was not a mighty fortress or a trade metropolis, but a simple, centuries-old farming community. Its story is one of a slow, inexorable fade, a mystery not of sudden violence, but of economic choices that unraveled the very fabric of a place. For generations, the families of Wharram, Percy worked the same strips of land in the open fields, their lives tied to the rhythm of the harvest and the parish church. Then, over the course of the 1500s, the village simply vanished. The official explanation is a single, cold phrase, enclosure. Wealthy landowners found it far more profitable to raise sheep for the booming wool trade than to rent small plots to dozens of peasant farmers. One by one, the tenant families were evicted, their homes torn down to make way for grazing pastures. But this economic shift does not fully explain the profound finality of what happened at Wharram, Percy. Why did the entire community disperse to the winds, never to reform elsewhere under the same name? And why, in all the centuries since, has no one ever chosen to build on this land again, not even for a farmhouse? The land was not poisoned, the water was not gone. The answer lies in the human heart of the community itself. The people of Wharram, Percy were not just a collection of farmers, they were a social organism bound by shared land, shared labor, and the church that anchored their lives. When that structure was dismantled, the community's reason for being in that specific spot dissolved. They drifted to nearby towns or became landless laborers, their collective identity shattered. The haunting ruins of the church, which stood long after the last house was gone, are a powerful symbol of this loss. It was the last piece of the village to hold on, a skeleton of a community that had lost its body. The site's enduring emptiness speaks to a deeper scar on the landscape, a place where the memory of a displaced people seems to linger, making it feel less like an empty field and more like a quiet, enduring monument to a way of life that was deliberately erased. This slow death by economics reveals that a community can be abandoned long before the last person leaves. High on a razor-backed ridge in the Alborz Mountains, the citadel of Alamut was more than a fortress, it was an idea. This was the legendary eagle's nest of the Nizari Ismailis, a sect known to history as the Assassins, and its reputation was its greatest defense. For nearly 2 centuries, this seemingly impregnable stronghold defied the greatest empires of the medieval world. Its followers were famed for a loyalty so absolute it struck fear into the hearts of sultans and caliphs. A single man, the Old Man of the Mountain, could command them from this remote peak. Then in 1256, the unthinkable happened. The Mongols arrived and the fortress surrendered without a major battle. The conquerors, led by Hulagu Khan, were thorough. They dismantled the fortifications stone by stone and made a special point of burning its legendary library, a repository of texts said to contain profound spiritual and scientific secrets. On the surface, this is a straightforward story of military defeat, but the real mystery begins after the Mongols left. Why was a location of such undeniable strategic power, a natural castle that had proven its worth for generations, never ever refortified? The Mongols were efficient destroyers, but they were also pragmatic. They often rebuilt strategic points to serve their own empire. Yet at Alamut, they and every power that followed chose to leave it in ruins. The answer seems to lie not in the stone they shattered, but in the stories they unleashed. The calculated destruction of the library and the dispersal of the Nizari community created a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed a dark legend. The fortress became synonymous with political murder, fanatical devotion, and occult knowledge. It was transformed in the popular imagination from a stronghold into a cursed place, a nest of ghosts and forgotten secrets. What ruler would want to base his power on a foundation of such fear? To rebuild Alamut would be to invite the very shadows that the Mongols had tried to extinguish. Its enduring abandonment is a powerful lesson in how a place's story can become more real than its stones, rendering a strategic masterpiece untouchable for centuries. This idea of a location being shunned by history finds a chilling parallel in a city that was not cursed by legend, but seemingly by the heavens themselves. The legend of Alamut was a prison of its own making, a fortress shunned by its own dark reputation. But what happens when a city's entire existence is built upon a single, fragile thread of commerce? On the northern shores of the Persian Gulf, the ruins of Siraf whisper an answer. This was once the greatest port in all of Persia, a dazzling gateway where the wealth of India and China flowed into the Islamic world. Its docks were a forest of masts, its warehouses overflowing with spices, silks, and precious gems. For centuries, Siraf was not just a city, it was a synonym for prosperity. Then it simply withered away, abandoned completely by the 15th century. A catastrophic earthquake in the year 977 is often blamed, a single, violent blow that shattered its walls and shattered its confidence. Yet other ports throughout history have risen from the rubble of even greater disasters. Why was Siraf never rebuilt? The truth is far more complex and insidious than a single tremor. The earthquake was merely the first crack in a foundation that was already starting to crumble. The city's lifeblood was its deep water harbor, but over the generations a quiet enemy was slowly choking it. Silt carried by rivers from the interior began to accumulate in the bay. What was once a haven for the largest ocean-going ships of the era became a shallow, treacherous lagoon. This was a death by 1,000 grains of sand, a slow economic strangulation that made the port less viable with each passing year. At the same time, new rivals were rising. The port of Hormuz, located on an island with a superior natural harbor, began to eclipse Siraf, drawing the lucrative trade routes away like a powerful magnet. The final, invisible cut may have been a shift in the very patterns of maritime trade itself, as merchants found more direct or profitable sea lanes. The people of Siraf did not just abandon a damaged city, they abandoned a broken machine. There was no longer any economic reason to endure the hardship of rebuilding. Why pour your soul into reconstructing a port that the world was already sailing past? Its empty streets are a stark lesson in the fragility of a specialized economy, a place that lived by trade and died when that trade moved on. This pattern of a city's purpose being stolen away leads us to a settlement that failed for the opposite reason, a place that was not bypassed by commerce but seemingly consumed by the earth itself. The silence of a persecuted faith can be as profound as any economic collapse. Perched high on a jagged limestone cliff in the French Pyrenees, the ruins of Roquefixade are a testament to this. This fortress was not built to guard a trade route or house a king, but to shelter souls. During the brutal Albigensian Crusade of the 13th century, it became one of the final, desperate refuges for the Cathars, a Christian sect deemed heretical by the Church in Rome. Here, high above the world that wanted to erase them, they tried to preserve their faith. Its story is intertwined with the legendary fall of Montségur, the last great Cathar stronghold. After Montségur was captured and its defenders burned alive in 1244, the crusading forces systematically dismantled the remaining pockets of resistance. Roquefixade, its purpose extinguished, was officially dismantled by royal order in the early 1400s. But here lies the true mystery. This was a solid, defensible site with a reliable water source in a region where such places were prized for centuries. Why was it never resettled? Not by shepherds, not by bandits, not by a local lord seeking a cheap stronghold. For 600 years, it has remained utterly empty. The answer seems to lie not in the stone, but in the memory it held. The mountain had become a monument to a lost people and a failed faith. The very act of seeking refuge here had stained the location, associating it so completely with persecution and tragic defeat that it was spiritually quarantined by the local population. To rebuild, there would have been to invite the ghosts of a shattered community. The ruins of Roquefixade stand not just as a forgotten fortress, but as a landscape scarred by ideology, a stark reminder that a place can be abandoned because its story is too painful to inhabit. This idea of a location being shunned for its past leads us to a city that was not avoided for its tragedy, but for a power it was believed to hold over life and death itself. A spiritual crisis can hollow out a civilization as surely as any drought. Deep in the canyons of the American Southwest, the silent stone cities of Mesa, Verde cling to the cliffs, a breathtaking monument to a people who simply walked away. The ancestral Pueblones were masters of a harsh land, building entire communities of multi-story dwellings tucked into sheer rock faces, connected by a network of hand and toe holds carved into the stone. For centuries, this was a thriving, complex society. Then, around the year 1300, every single person left. The classic explanation is a great drought, a prolonged dry period that gripped the region for decades. But this answer feels incomplete for a people who were brilliant hydrologists, who had survived arid conditions for generations by building sophisticated reservoirs and conserving every precious drop of water. A drought would have been a severe hardship, but would it truly be a death sentence for a culture so deeply rooted and resilient? The clues left behind point to something more profound than a failed harvest. Archaeologists find that the dwellings were not abandoned in panic. Many precious items were left in place, ceremonial objects and grinding stones that held both practical and spiritual value. This suggests a deliberate, orderly exodus, a people who made a collective decision to seek a new beginning rather than fight a losing battle. So what was the final straw? Many historians now believe the environmental stress fractured the society from within. The prolonged drought may have shattered the authority of the religious leaders, the very individuals believed to intercede with the gods for rain and fertility. When their prayers went unanswered, faith in the entire social and spiritual order could have collapsed. This was not just a search for water, but a quest for renewed meaning, a pilgrimage to a promised land where the connection between the people, their leaders, and the cosmos could be restored. They left their magnificent cliff palaces not as a defeat but as an act of hope, moving south to join other Pueblo communities and begin their story anew. This profound choice to leave a masterpiece of architecture behind for the sake of a community's soul challenges our modern idea of what truly makes a society worth saving. A community can choose to leave its home in search of a renewed spirit, but what happens when an entire continent is ultimately rejected? The sagas of the Norse speak of a place they called Vinland, a land of wild grapes and plentiful resources discovered by Leif Erikson around the year 1000. For a brief moment, it seemed the Vikings had successfully planted their flag in the New World, centuries before Columbus. The archaeological site of Elant's Oaks Meadows in Newfoundland stands as silent, stone proof of their arrival. Yet this was not the start of a grand settlement, but its entire story. The mystery is not that they came, but that they gave up so completely. The sagas tell of conflict with the indigenous people they called the Skraelinga, likely the Beothuk or Dorset peoples. These clashes were undoubtedly terrifying for a small group of Norse, armed with iron weapons but vastly outnumbered in a strange land. Yet to label this a simple story of warfare is to miss the deeper, more profound truth of their failure. Think of the immense logistical reality they faced. A voyage from Greenland to Newfoundland was a perilous undertaking of weeks across open, stormy ocean. They were at the very end of the longest supply line in the medieval world. Every nail, every piece of iron, every essential item from their old life had to be shipped across that vast and unforgiving distance. And for what? The rewards were simply not compelling enough. Vinland offered timber and grazing land, things that were scarce in Greenland, but it did not offer the one thing that truly fueled the Viking spirit: overwhelming wealth. There were no vast silver hoards to plunder, no wealthy towns to raid, no kingdoms to extort. They were not conquerors facing a crumbling empire, but pioneers staring into an endless, unknown continent filled with people who would fiercely defend their home. The project required a massive, sustained investment of people and resources from a Norse population in Greenland that numbered only in the low thousands. Faced with the sheer scale of the challenge and the minimal returns, the colonial ambition simply evaporated. The outpost was not overrun, it was recalled. Its people packed up their tools and their stories, sailed back to Greenland, and never returned. The entire North American continent was deemed not worth the trouble. This was not a military defeat, but a quiet, calculated economic and strategic decision, a failure of imagination in the face of a world too vast to comprehend. A city of gods and merchants now sleeps beneath the Mediterranean waves. Thonis-Heracleion was not just a port, it was the sacred gateway to all of Egypt, the mandatory stop for every ship laden with tribute and trade before the rise of Alexandria. Its grand temples were believed to be visited by the gods themselves, and its harbors echoed with a dozen languages. Then, slowly and irrevocably, the earth beneath it turned to water. A perfect storm of environmental disasters conspired against it, a combination of soil liquefaction, where the solid ground simply lost its strength, a gradual rise in sea levels, and likely a major earthquake that acted as a final, brutal catalyst. The city did not vanish in a single day, but sank over centuries, its colossal statues and monumental gateways gradually submerged by the relentless sea. The true puzzle is not that it sank, but that it was allowed to. Why would a civilization as powerful and organized as Pharaonic Egypt, and later its Greco-Roman successors, simply surrender their most important commercial and religious hub without a fight? Imagine the sheer scale of investment lost: the temples, the warehouses, the docks. The answer lies not in the water, but in the shifting land. The many branches of the Nile Delta are like the veins of a living body, and over time they changed their course. The specific distributary that fed Thonis-Heracleion with fresh water and silt, the very reason for its existence, began to wither and close up. At the same time, a new star was rising just along the coast: Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great, its superior, deeper harbor, and its position as a new capital of knowledge and power, began to siphon away the lifeblood of Thonis-Heracleion. Why pour immense resources into saving a drowning city when a brighter, more modern future was being built just next door? The economic and spiritual center of gravity had shifted decisively. The final abandonment in the 8th century was merely the last act in a long play. The priests, the merchants, and the government simply packed up their operations and moved to the new center of the world, leaving the old one to the sea and to legend. Its rediscovery by marine archaeologists millennia later revealed a city frozen in its final moments, a stark lesson in how even the most vital of places can be rendered obsolete by the relentless currents of geography and commerce. A single stone church stands on the green fjord of Greenland, its walls still standing after 6 centuries of silence. This is H-Valsi, the best-preserved Norse ruin from the eastern settlement, a community that represented Europe's furthest western frontier. For over 400 years, these Scandinavian settlers thrived here, raising livestock, building churches, and trading walrus ivory and furs with the homelands. Then, in the early 15th century, every last Norseman vanished. The Little Ice Age had firmly gripped the region, extending the sea ice, shortening the growing season, and making the voyage back to Iceland and Norway increasingly perilous. Yet climate change alone cannot explain the eerie quiet of their departure. There are no mass graves to suggest a horrific famine or plague. No burnt ruins point to a violent conflict with the Inuit peoples who shared the island. The last written record is a wedding held at H-Valsi Church in 1408, an account of normal life that reads like the final sentence of a long story. After that, nothing. So what became of them? Did they slowly intermarry with the Inuit, their European identity dissolving into a new culture? This seems a peaceful answer, yet Inuit oral histories make little mention of such a widespread assimilation. Did they build one last, desperate fleet to sail back to a Scandinavia they had never known, only to be lost in the treacherous, ice-choked waters of the North Atlantic? Or did they make a final, fatal attempt to push further west, searching for the vanished colony of Vinland, a journey from which no one returned? The Greenland colony did not fall in a dramatic siege. It simply faded away, its people disappearing into the Arctic silence without a single chronicle to mark their passing. Their empty farms and silent churches pose a haunting question about the limits of resilience, forcing us to wonder what happens when a people, cut off from the world they once knew, simply reach the end of their will to endure. The fate of a city can be sealed not just by conquest, but by the absolute finality of a conqueror's strategy. On a cliff above the blue waters of the Mediterranean, the Crusader city of Arsuf represented everything the Mamluk Sultan Baybars sought to erase from the Holy Land. This was not merely a fortress, it was a symbol, a powerful lordship known in ancient times as Apollonia. For over a century, its walls had defied the tides of war, a bastion of European power on the Levantine coast. Then in 1265, Baybars brought his full force to bear. The siege was brutal, and the city's capture was only the beginning. The Mamluk policy was one of systematic and total annihilation. His engineers did not just breach the walls, they methodically dismantled them, stone by stone, until nothing defensible remained. Towers were pulled down, gates were shattered, and the great castle was reduced to a skeleton. This was a calculated act of geopolitical surgery. Baybars was creating a scorched earth buffer zone along the entire coast, ensuring that no future Crusader army would ever find a safe harbor or a ready-made fortress from which to launch a new campaign. The destruction of Arsuf was so thorough it feels like a message carved into the landscape itself. Yet the deeper mystery is not the violence of its end, but the enduring silence that followed. This was a prime location on a busy coastline with a natural harbor and fertile lands. Why, in all the centuries since, has no settlement ever risen from these particular ruins? The answer lies in the profound shift of power that Baybars engineered. With the coastal cities razed and the interior under firm Mamluk control, the economic and political reasons for Arsuf's existence vanished. Trade routes moved inland, power was consolidated away from the shore, and the very memory of the city as a living place began to fade. It became a permanent casualty of holy war, its stones a monument to a strategy that valued security over commerce and permanent change over rebuilding. This deliberate creation of a dead zone raises a chilling question about the legacy of conflict and how the shadow of a long-forgotten war can still dictate the emptiness of a place today. The deliberate destruction of Asaf created a dead zone that would remain empty for centuries, but some cities are abandoned by history itself. In the plains of modern Pakistan, the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro present a mystery of a different magnitude, a silence that spans millennia. This was one of the world's first great cities, a marvel of the Indus Valley civilization that flourished over 4,000 years ago. Its urban planning was breathtakingly advanced, with a complex grid system of streets, a sophisticated water supply and drainage network, and even public baths and granaries. It was a metropolis of staggering order and intellect, yet around 1900 years before the Common Era, it was abandoned, and the truly baffling part is what happened next, or rather, what did not. For century after century, through the rise and fall of empires, through the entire medieval period, no one ever rebuilt it. The great city remained a collection of empty mounds. The reasons for its initial decline are a classic historical puzzle. Did a prolonged drought, a shift in the monsoon patterns, slowly starve the city? Did the life-giving Gaga-Hakra River, the probable source of its water, simply dry up, turning its farmlands to dust? Or was there some form of social upheaval or invasion that shattered its carefully ordered society? The evidence is fragmented and unclear, but the deeper mystery is the cultural amnesia that followed. The knowledge of how to build such a city, the understanding of its standardized weights and measures, its unique undeciphered script, all of it vanished from the region. This was not a torch being passed, it was a light being extinguished. The city's ruins were so completely forgotten that when medieval peoples eventually settled on the same site, they built simple villages on top of the massive, ancient mounds, completely unaware they were living atop the skeleton of a civilization that had once rivaled Egypt and Mesopotamia. They walked over the buried bricks of a lost world, their plows occasionally turning up strange artifacts they could not explain. This adds a profound layer to the enigma. It is one thing for a city to fall, but for its very memory to be erased, for its achievements to be so utterly lost that later cultures could not even recognize the grandeur beneath their feet, speaks to a cataclysm of a different order. Mohenjo-Daro stands as a stark warning of how fragile a society's legacy can be, and how a civilization, no matter how great, can vanish not just from the map, but from the story of humanity itself. A town can cling to a mountain for 1,000 years, only to be betrayed by the very stone that protected it. Perched on a crumbling cliff in southern Italy, the ghost town of Croco presents a hauntingly modern medieval mystery. Its empty streets and skeletal buildings are not the result of a forgotten war or a lost trade route, but of a slow, creeping collapse that unfolded over generations. Founded as a Byzantine stronghold, Croco survived Norman conquests, feudal conflicts, and the Black Death, its strategic hilltop position offering security and commanding views of the surrounding valleys. For centuries, it was a fortress of stone and spirit, yet by the late 20th century, it was completely empty. The official reason was a series of landslides and earthquakes in the 1960s that rendered the town uninhabitable, leading to a government-mandated evacuation. But this is merely the final chapter of a much deeper story. The true puzzle is why, after a millennium of stability, the ground beneath Croco suddenly began to give way. The answer lies in a quiet, human-made vulnerability. The hill was composed of fragile clay and sandstone, a geology that had always been delicate. Over time, the very practices that sustained the town began to undermine it. The excavation of its foundational rock for building materials, the intensive agriculture on the surrounding slopes that disrupted the soil, and the construction of a sewer system that altered water drainage all worked in concert to weaken the hill's core. Each new well, each new cellar, each plowed field was another tiny cut until the entire mountain began to silently slip. This was not a sudden cataclysm but a slow-motion crisis, a lesson in how a society can inadvertently engineer its own demise through the cumulative impact of daily life. The people of Krakow did not flee an invader, they were defeated by the invisible consequences of their own existence, a stark reminder that the earth we build upon is not always as permanent as it seems. The legend of a city swallowed whole by the desert is one of humanity's oldest stories. In the heart of the Ani Desert, the fabled city of Yuba was that legend made real, a place so lost it was called the Atlantis of the Sands. For centuries, it was merely a tale from the Quran and Bedouin folklore, a wealthy hub for the trade of frankincense that was punished for its arrogance and vanished beneath the sands. Then, in the 1990s, satellite imagery and ground exploration finally pinpointed its ruins. The discovery confirmed a breathtaking truth. The city had not just been abandoned, it had suffered a catastrophic collapse, with a significant portion of its fortress falling into a massive sinkhole. This dramatic image seems to perfectly match the ancient myth of a city being consumed by the earth. But the real story of Yuba's demise is far more complex than a single, sudden event. The sinkhole was likely the final, spectacular act in a long and quiet tragedy. Yuba was not just a city, it was a sophisticated machine built to survive in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Its lifeblood was a delicate and water-intensive agricultural system, a network of wells and canals that sustained its population and the camels that carried its precious cargo. Frankincense, the aromatic resin worth its weight in gold, was the sole reason for its immense wealth. This created a profound vulnerability. When the demand for frankincense began to wane, as new sea routes bypassed the arduous desert caravans and shifting religious practices reduced its use, Yuba's economy began to wither. Its wealth and its ability to maintain its complex water systems slowly evaporated. At the same time, the very ground beneath it was growing unstable. The limestone caverns that held the precious water the city relied upon were being slowly drained by constant use. The sinkhole was not a divine punishment, but a geological inevitability, the final collapse of a foundation that had been silently crumbling for generations. Yuba's fate was a perfect storm, a deadly convergence of economic failure and environmental catastrophe. It is a stark lesson in the fragility of a society that builds its entire existence on a single, precious resource, a warning that echoes from the deserts of Oman to the jungles of Cambodia. From the grand collapse of desert trade empires, we find a different kind of mystery in the cold stone of a Polish castle. The ruins of Olsztyn Castle are haunted by a single, grim name, the Hunger Tower. Local legend tells of a nobleman walled up inside this tower and left to starve to death, his silent suffering forever etched into the masonry. This dark folklore gives the empty castle a human face, a story of personal tragedy to explain its quiet halls. Yet the true history of the castle's abandonment is far less dramatic and in many ways more telling. Its decline was a slow process of military irrelevance. As the power of the Teutonic Knights waned and the castle was damaged during the 17th century Swedish deluge, its strategic importance simply evaporated. New borders were drawn and the great cannons of the age could shatter its medieval walls. Why maintain a costly fortress that had lost its reason to exist? The local population did not vanish, they simply moved their lives to the more convenient town below, leaving the old fortress to the elements and to the storytellers. The legend of the Hunger Tower is a powerful example of how we fill historical voids with narrative. When faced with the silent question of a ruin, the human imagination often prefers a ghost to a tax ledger, a tale of betrayal to a slow decline in provincial funding. These stories are not lies, but a different layer of truth, showing how a place lives on in memory long after its last inhabitant is gone. This intertwining of myth and mortar leads us to consider another abandoned city, where the legends are not of human cruelty, but of divine punishment. The legend of a lost city in the Kalahari is a ghost story written in sand. For over a century, explorers and adventurers have risked their lives searching for a vast, ruined metropolis said to lie somewhere in the immense, sun-scorched desert of southern Africa. They returned with tales of glimpsing distant stone walls shimmering in the heat haze, but no one ever brought back definitive proof. The grand city remained perpetually out of reach, a mirage of history. So why does this story persist with such power? The answer likely lies not in a single, spectacular ruin, but in the quiet, accumulated truth of many smaller abandonments. The region was once home to thriving Tswana towns and possibly even outposts connected to the great Zimbabwe culture. These were not mythical metropolises, but substantial communities built around reliable water sources. When a prolonged and severe drought gripped the land, these waterholes vanished, and the delicate balance of life was shattered. The people had no choice but to disperse, to seek new lands where the earth was not so cruel. Over generations, the memory of these scattered, abandoned stone foundations coalesced into a single, grand narrative. A cluster of deserted villages became, in the telling, a single lost city of unimaginable splendor. This transformation speaks to a profound human impulse. We find it difficult to accept that a civilization could simply fade back into the dust from which it came. The quiet tragedy of a people forced to leave their homes due to a changing climate is somehow less compelling than the epic mystery of a vanished empire. The legend of the lost city of the Kalahari is a powerful reminder that history is not just written by the winners, but also by the storytellers, who often prefer a magnificent ruin to a sobering truth about our own fragile relationship with the environment. This blurring of history and legend forces us to ask what other grand mysteries might be built upon a foundation of simpler, more human-scale losses. The legend of the lost Kalahari reminds us that some cities vanish into myth, while others are deliberately erased by our own hands. On the banks of China's Yangtze River, the ancient city of Fengdu faced exactly this fate. For nearly 2,000 years, it was known as the City of Ghosts, a place rich with temples and shrines dedicated to the afterlife, where the souls of the departed were said to be judged. Its eerie reputation was built on spiritual belief, not abandonment. Then, in the early 21st century, its destiny was permanently altered by a modern megaproject. The rising waters of the Three Gorges Dam did not slowly encroach like the sea at Dunwich. They were unleashed in a planned, deliberate deluge. The city was systematically evacuated and then intentionally flooded, its centuries of history submerged beneath a new, human-made lake. This was not a mystery born of a forgotten cause, but a documented, government-mandated disappearance. The haunting question it raises is entirely modern. What does it mean to willingly sacrifice a city? The residents of Fengdu did not flee a changing climate or a conquering army. They were relocated for progress, for electricity, for flood control. Their departure echoes the collective, ordered exits of places like Skara, Brae, but with a crucial difference: the force compelling them was not nature, but a conscious human decision on a colossal scale. Fengdu now exists as a new kind of archaeological site. a time capsule preserved in fresh water rather than desert sand or volcanic ash. Future historians will not puzzle over why it was abandoned. The records will be clear. Instead, they will grapple with the emotional and cultural cost, pondering the weight of that trade-off between preserving the past and powering the future. This modern ghost city forces us to see the ancient ruins in a new light, wondering how many of them were not victims of random catastrophe, but casualties of a calculated choice made by a society convinced it was moving forward. A citadel of sun-baked earth once stood as an unshakable fortress in the heart of the Iranian desert. The Arg-e-Bam was not merely a castle, but an entire city crafted from mud brick, a labyrinth of walls, towers, and bazaars that represented the pinnacle of medieval engineering. It was the largest adobe structure on Earth, a colossal achievement designed to withstand both armies and the brutal desert climate. Its lifeblood was a masterpiece in its own right, a network of underground canals known as kanats, which tapped into distant aquifers to bring life-giving water to the palms and the people within its walls. For centuries, it was a vital oasis on the Silk Road, a humming caravanserai where the wealth of empires changed hands. Then, long before the devastating earthquake of 2003 shattered its physical form, the city was already a ghost. By the 19th century, its bustling streets were silent, its grand arches empty. The great mystery of Bam is not its destruction, but its desertion. How could a place of such immense scale and sophisticated design, a fortress that had proven its worth for generations, be simply walked away from? The answer is a quiet story of economic obsolescence. The old trade routes that had been its reason for being began to shift, bypassing the region in favor of newer, more efficient paths. The world moved on, and the citadel's strategic importance evaporated like a desert mirage. Compounding this, a modern town was founded nearby, offering easier living without the need to climb ancient stairways or maintain crumbling mud walls. The people made a practical choice, leaving the monumental old city to the wind and the sand. Its abandoned Kanat system is the most poignant symbol of this decline, a silent network of tunnels that once sang with the sound of flowing water, rendered useless by the changing currents of commerce and human settlement. Bam stands as a humbling lesson in how even the most formidable human creations designed to last for eternity can be undone not by force but by irrelevance. Rising from the churning Atlantic like a jagged stone fortress, Skellig Michael represents a different kind of abandonment, one not of cities but of spirit. For over 600 years, a small, devout community of early Christian monks clung to this impossibly steep island, carving a monastery from the very rock. They built their beehive-shaped stone huts on cliffs that dropped sheer into the ocean, tending tiny gardens and catching fish while spending their days in prayer and contemplation, utterly removed from the world. Their life was one of extreme, deliberate hardship, a testament to a faith so powerful it could conquer the terror of the sea itself. Then, sometime around the 12th or 13th century, they gathered their few possessions, boarded their small boats, and left their island sanctuary forever. The question is not what drove them from such a harsh existence, for that was the point of being there, but what finally broke a commitment that had endured for centuries. The most logical explanation points to a changing climate. The North Atlantic began to cool during the medieval period, a shift that would have made the already treacherous sea crossings to the mainland even more deadly, cutting off vital supplies and contact. The monks were not just isolated, they were becoming marooned, yet climate alone feels insufficient to explain their departure. A more profound shift may have been occurring within the church itself. The era of the remote, ascetic hermit was giving way to a new model of religious life centered on large, wealthy mainland monasteries that were deeply integrated with society and politics. The spiritual ideal that had driven men to seek God on a barren rock in the ocean was simply fading, replaced by a different path to holiness. Their departure feels like the end of an era, a quiet closing of a door on a form of devotion so intense we can scarcely comprehend it today. The empty stone cells of Skellig Michael stand as a monument not to a failed society, but to a vanished way of seeking the divine, a choice to leave behind an entire world they had built not for comfort but for their souls. A city of faith was not built upon the mountain but within it. The cave city of Verde in Georgia is a breathtaking labyrinth of chambers, churches, and living quarters carved directly into the sheer face of the Eresheti mountain. In its 12th century prime, this was a vertical metropolis for as many as 2,000 monks, a spiritual fortress containing a grand throne room, a bustling bakery, and an intricate irrigation system for its terraced farms, all hidden behind a massive, fortified facade. Then, barely a century after its founding, a catastrophic earthquake in 1283 struck. It did not just damage the city, it ripped away its outer mask, shearing off the front of the mountain complex and exposing the hidden chambers to the open air, leaving them vulnerable and broken. While this seismic blow is often cited as the cause of Verde's demise, the deeper puzzle is its long, slow fade. The monastery was not immediately abandoned. A small, resilient community clung to the ruins for centuries, a flickering candle in the vast stone wound. The final, definitive extinguishing of that flame came with an Ottoman raid in 1551. Yet even after this violence, the site was never truly reclaimed. Why was such a monumental achievement, a symbol of Georgia's golden age, never resurrected? The answer lies not in the earthquake's power, but in the shifting world it left behind. The earthquake did more than collapse tunnels, it shattered an era. The political and cultural momentum that had created Verde, the unified kingdom that could marshal the resources for such an audacious project, had itself crumbled in the centuries that followed. Georgia fractured under internal strife and relentless external pressure from neighboring empires. The will, the wealth, and the collective purpose needed to restore the mountain city to its former glory simply no longer existed. The world had moved on, leaving the caves as a haunting relic of a more devout and ambitious age, a testament to what a society can achieve at its peak and what it is forced to relinquish when its power fades. While the fortress of Timuturacan vanished into legend, its shadow across the water tells a similar story of disappearance. On the Crimean side of the Kerch Strait, the port of Timuturacan was once a jewel of the Byzantine Empire, a bustling administrative and trade hub that rivaled its northern neighbor. It was a city of merchants and officials, a vital link in a chain of commerce that circled the Black Sea. Yet it too faded into near total obscurity, its name all but erased from the maps. The simultaneous vanishing of both Timuturacan and Timuturacan is the real mystery here. How could two significant urban centers, positioned at a crucial maritime crossroads, both fail and be abandoned? This points to something far larger than the misfortune of a single city. It suggests a regional, systemic collapse. The life of these ports depended on a delicate and interconnected system, the political stability of the empires that protected their trade routes, and the environmental balance of the sea lanes and coastlines they relied upon. When that system faltered, both cities fell together. The slow siltation of harbors, the shifting patterns of trade as new powers rose, and the relentless political fragmentation that crumbled the Byzantine and Rus spheres of influence would have acted like a tide going out, leaving both ports stranded. Their paired fates challenge us to look beyond the story of a single ruined wall or a forgotten battle. They force us to see the landscape as a living network, where the failure of one node can trigger a cascade, emptying an entire region of its people and purpose. This pattern of linked destinies raises a profound question. How many other abandoned cities were not solitary tragedies, but part of a much wider, silent exodus? The annihilation of Merv was an event of such calculated horror it still echoes across 8 centuries. As the capital of the Seljuk Empire, this metropolis on the Silk Road was a global center of learning, trade, and power, a city so vast it was said to rival Baghdad and Constantinople. Its libraries and observatories attracted the finest minds of the Islamic world, and its population likely numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Then, in 1221, the Mongol general Tolui, son of Genghis Khan, arrived at its gates. The city surrendered, but its fate was already sealed by a previous betrayal. Tolui's order was absolute and methodical. Every single man, woman, and child was to be executed, with only 400 artisans spared to be sent back to Mongolia. Contemporary historians, their voices trembling with the horror of it, wrote that the killing was so systematic the Mongols assigned a specific number of corpses each soldier was required to produce. The pyramids of skulls built outside the ruined walls were a message to the entire world, a declaration that resistance was not just futile, but would lead to absolute erasure. Yet for all its terrifying efficiency, this violence is not the city's ultimate mystery. The deeper puzzle is why Merv, a place of such profound strategic and economic importance, never truly rose again. It was partially resettled, yes, but it became a ghost of its former self, a small provincial town that was eventually abandoned completely, its grand ruins left to the desert. How could a location with every geographical advantage fail to recover? The answer lies not in the blood that was spilled, but in the water that was cut off. The Mongols did not just slaughter the people of Merv, they murdered the city's very ecosystem. Their engineers systematically destroyed the city's lifeblood, the immense and ancient network of underground canals known as kanats. These were not simple ditches, but magnificent feats of engineering. Tunnels dug deep into the earth to tap distant aquifers, stretching for miles to bring life-giving water to the fields and fountains of the arid plain. Destroying them was an act of profound strategic insight. It was easy to rebuild a shattered wall or even a palace, but to restore hundreds of miles of subterranean waterways, each tunnel requiring precise gradients and constant, dangerous maintenance, required a concentrated population with generations of specialized knowledge. That knowledge died with the citizens of Merv in that single, terrible week. The city's physical heart, its walls and buildings, could have been repaired. But its circulatory system was irreparably severed. Without the kanats, the land around Merv began to revert to desert, the fields drying up, the gardens withering. The economic foundation for a great city had vanished. Trade caravans, seeing a crippled and depopulated region, would naturally bypass it for more reliable oases. Merv teaches us a brutal lesson about the fragility of civilization. A society's greatest strength can also be its most vulnerable point. Its monumental walls were ultimately less critical than the hidden veins of water that gave it life. When those were cut, the city was not just conquered, it was made impossible. This final insight into a civilization's hidden vulnerabilities brings us to the last and perhaps most poignant of our 30 mysterious cities, a place where the end came not from a sword, but from a slow, creeping silence. The silent stones of 30 cities now lie behind us, from Skara Brae's orderly exit to Merv's systematic erasure. Each ruin tells its own story of crisis, yet together they whisper a far more unsettling truth about the nature of civilization itself. What profound connection links a Scottish Neolithic village, a Persian trading port, and an Inca mountain citadel? On the surface, their individual fates were shaped by unique pressures, a specific drought, a shifting trade route, or a conquering army. But if you listen closely to the quiet they share, you will hear the same three themes echoing through the centuries. Environmental stress, economic collapse, and political upheaval form a trinity of vulnerability that has haunted human societies from the very beginning. A prolonged drought could shatter the spiritual authority of Mesa Verde's leaders. The slow siltation of a harbor could strangle the economic life from Siraf. The fragmentation of a unifying empire could leave a Mangup Kale strategically obsolete. Yet the specific catalyst, the final straw that broke the will of a people to endure, remains the great enigma. Why did one society fight for generations against the encroaching sea, while another walked away from a mountain masterpiece without a struggle? The answer may lie not in the grand forces themselves, but in how they interact with the human spirit. A civilization is not just its buildings or its trade goods. It is a shared story, a collective agreement about its place in the world. When environmental disaster, economic failure, and political chaos strike at once, that story can unravel. The people of Skara Brae did not just run out of food, they may have lost faith in the future their home represented. The Norse of Greenland did not just face a colder climate, they faced the soul-crushing isolation of a world that had forgotten them. This is the final and most haunting mystery these 30 cities present. They force us to ask what we are truly building when we raise our own cities. Is it just stone and steel, or is it a narrative resilient enough to withstand the inevitable storms? Our journey through these empty streets ultimately leads us back to ourselves, to a quiet question about the foundations of our own world, and what it would take for us to one day become the next great silence. The empty streets of these 30 cities leave behind a chorus of unanswered questions, and historians have spent generations trying to give them a voice. The evidence points in a dozen different directions at once. Was it a great drought, a plague that swept through with terrifying speed, or had the soil simply given out after centuries of farming? Perhaps the people rose up against a ruling class that had failed them. For every city, a dozen theories compete. Yet the frustrating truth is that no single explanation, no matter how compelling, seems to fit every case. A plague might explain the rapid emptying of one settlement, but it cannot account for the orderly, planned departure from another, where precious belongings were left carefully in place. The real answer for most of these places likely lies in a perfect storm, a devastating convergence of multiple crises. A city might be struggling with a prolonged drought when a new trade route opens elsewhere, draining its economy at the very moment its political leadership is fracturing under the strain. One crisis alone could be weathered, but two or three striking at once could shatter a society's will to continue. Our greatest challenge in solving these mysteries is a profound silence. We almost never have a written record from the people who actually made the decision to leave. There is no diary from a resident of Skara Brae describing the last winter, no chronicle from a monk at Skellig Michael explaining why their faith was no longer enough to hold back the cold Atlantic storms. We are left as detectives at a crime scene with only the physical evidence, the material remains, a broken pot in a hearth, the layout of an irrigation canal, the wear on a stone step. These fragments are our only witnesses. Interpreting this silent testimony requires a careful and often speculative reading of the clues. It is a process that blends rigorous science with a touch of informed imagination, a detective story stretched across centuries. This is what makes the study of these lost places so endlessly fascinating and so deeply humbling as we piece together the final days of a world from the echoes it left behind in the dust. From the windswept plains of Anatolia to the dense jungles of Peru, these 30 abandoned cities stand as solemn reminders that history is not a simple march of progress, but a story of flourishing and failure, of communities that built wonders and then vanished. Their silent stones speak a universal language of fragility. We have seen how a single broken water channel could doom a desert metropolis, how a shifting trade route could drain the life from a mighty port, and how a change in the climate could force a people to relinquish their mountain masterpiece. These are not just isolated tales of disaster, but profound lessons about the delicate balance every society must maintain. The true power of these ghostly places lies in the questions they force us to ask about our own world. What are the invisible threads that hold our modern cities together? Is it the flow of capital, the stability of our climate, or a shared belief in our collective future? The next time you walk through a bustling modern city with its endless noise and motion, pause for a moment and remember the silent ones. Consider the intricate systems that bring food to your table and water to your tap, and reflect on the shared story that convinces millions to call this same place home. What stories will our own urban centers tell centuries from now? Will they be tales of enduring ingenuity, or will they too become mysteries for a future generation to ponder? Thank you for joining this exploration of humanity's quietest chapters. If you have a theory about one of these ghostly cities, share it in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries of the past.